up, fam? Welcome to the BOON podcast. I'm Candice Wynn, your host, and of course, I have Robert E. Purvey with me here today. What's up, bro?
I am here. Always happy to be here with you, and I mean that.
I think we got a pretty good thing going too in our conversations, and I love our conversations because I think it's just an opportunity to really just reflect back on our ministry journey and all the years that we have been in the trenches and we have been spending working with people and supporting them. But I can honestly say, I think some people see where, and not to say that by no means do I think, hey, I've arrived or we've arrived, but sometimes people see you at a certain point and they think that, hey, you started out right there.
Yeah.
But we didn't start out like that. The years that we have spent in ministry have really equipped us to be able to sit at this table and have some conversations. I remember, one ministry failed early on. I was in seminary, right? And I had to preach a sermon at my church. I ain't gonna say what church it was, but I had to preach a sermon at some church. And it was a week after I preached that sermon, bro, I discovered something in class and I realized, half of your sermon was wrong. Half of the things that I was talking about was absolutely wrong. And I'm like, nobody said enough. And I had some pretty good mentors, but they weren't there at the time. And nobody in the church said anything. And I think that it's people don't always see the mess ups that we make along the way. Mm-hmm. They see you when you get to a certain point and they're just like, oh man, I want to be able to climb in ministry and do this and do that, but not really recognizing, hey, it took some work to get here.
Yeah, a lot of work. And we have arrived to this point, but we arrived with a wagon load of mistakes.
Listen.
You know what I mean? A bus load if you want to. A bus load. Because I had to realize I started at 23.
Man, listen.
I started full-time ministry at 23. So one thing I had to realize is I was their pastor, not their friend.
Man.
Whew. And so that was, if I had to say a fail, that would be one, because I came in trying to be friend.
Yeah.
Big brother, homeboy, because I came from the Boys and Girls Club. So my interaction with students was more recreational, more community driven. So coming to the church, having to be a spiritual pastoral lead, it took me about 3 years to really figure it out.
Yeah.
So I'll tell anybody between 2007 and 2010, if they know anything about Jesus, it's like all the Holy Spirit.
So real.
Nothing to do with me because
listen, I agree with that. Because I think, when I first started out in ministry, I spent so many years just trying to figure out, okay, I'm here just supposed to be like a big sister, right?
Yeah.
Not really realizing, no, I'm meant to pastor you.
Yeah.
And there's a much different role that you play in somebody's life as like a big sister or a big cousin than you do as a pastor.
Right.
So this conversation, we're talking about some of this stuff.
Yeah.
We're talking about the miseducation of a next-gen leader. We're just going to dive in, y'all, and talk about a few things that we've learned along the way.
This is not going to be our last album.
It's not going to be.
Miseducation.
No, it's not going to be our last.
I'm making sure because
you know what? Okay,
you didn't get my Andre 3000 reference. I don't know if you got that.
So hold on, wait. I understand. Listen, when you talk about miseducation, I think about Carter G. Woodson and I think about Miss Lauryn Hill. Now, one person we not going to talk about is Miss Lauryn Hill.
That's who I'm talking about.
Listen, I know. There was no mistaking when we titled this episode, The Miseducation of a Next Gen Leader.
I've been waiting for album number 2 for 20 years.
She has one, her Unplugged one that she did on MTV. She has part 1 and part 2, and they both go hard, right, from front to back.
You're a fan.
A huge fan. Celebrating the 25th anniversary.
I love it.
Man, so tell me though, bro, what you got for us? We're gonna let's do a little countdown, not necessarily in any kind of order.
All right.
So these aren't ranked in any kind of way, but just 4 things that maybe we thought we needed when we were in, stepping into leadership in ministry, or things we might have learned along the way.
So I honestly thought that that I had to have everything right. Like I thought I had to be correct in everything because it was told to me by mentors from a loving place that I had souls in my hand.
Oh, the weight of that.
Come on, right? And it was like in the office, in the conference room, we're depending on you, young man.
Wow.
You have souls on the line. I'm like, and at 23, I'm
Somebody's
like,
eternal salvation.
you know what I'm saying?
Ooh,
like, Jesus barely got me. You know what I mean? So, I mean, and those of you who know me now, you still question my salvation sometimes. But
he said it first, ladies and gentlemen, not me.
But I thought I had to have everything right. That was one of.
So what was that process like? How did you learn that, hey, there's room for error here?
Honestly, mentors that were just a couple of years beyond where I was. Like, so the mentors that gave me the directive and gave me the go ahead, right, were older generals in ministry, right? So it was the Tim Rosses that came along in my life. And at the time, Tim was young adult pastor at the Potter's House. Okay. So he was just a few years removed from where I was. So his direction and mentorship helped me realize, like, hey, you're going, there's no way you cannot mess up. There's no way you cannot. So what you do is you learn from the mistakes and you get better. If you can learn and get better from each mistake, you'll become a great leader.
So what did that look like in practice, though? Feeling like you had to get everything right.
So programming, so making sure that when it came to, I'll back up. I'll be real practical for some leaders, right? When it came to like field trips, making sure that everything had a biblical reference. You know what I'm saying? Making sure if we went to Six Flags, we had worship before we left. You know what I'm saying? Have prayer before we get on the bus. You know, before we get off.
Stopping every hour.
You know what I mean?
While you riding the roller coaster.
Praying with the volunteer, all that, right? You know, just everybody meet back at the Superman ride at 4:00 because we're gonna pray for those, like just those type of things. Just really over spiritualizing stuff, right? Because the way it was given to me, I got souls on the line. So getting everything right looked very super spiritual. And if it wasn't, I feel like I was failing, right? If I didn't, if I didn't pray before something, or if I didn't schedule, if a service wasn't scheduled right, or if a Bible study season wasn't done right, or if I didn't have enough volunteers to mentor the young men and young ladies, like, so it was, I felt like I had to get everything right. And in that, kind of lost myself, right? Because when I made a mistake, and I'm still like that a lot now. If I make a mistake, I'm real hard on myself. It takes about 72 hours to like really regroup.
Now, I think that what you're saying here, it's so powerful because on one end, I think that, hey, yeah, there's a need to show teenagers the way to incorporate their faith into their everyday lives. Right. And I think that some of that is what you were trying to do. But the challenge is when it becomes in excess. You know, when it becomes just like excessive, like, yo, hey, we can have some fun, because fun is spiritual and fun is holy. You know, and when Jesus says, I come to give you life and life and more abundantly, I believe that includes some kind of a fun, right? That's a part of that abundant life. So, okay, I got you.
Yeah. So, I just, it took me realizing like, yo, like, I gotta have fun, but at the same time, it's like, we on a marathon. It's not a sprint. So they're like, we only get better if we do make some mistakes. And that was with everything. That was with volunteers and the students. And so I had to think more of a leader, pastor, than a volunteer. Volunteer mindset, pastoral mindset is different for me. And so I just had to, hey, yo, we gonna mess up, but I couldn't continuously beat myself up over mistakes because my volunteers were looking at me, kids were looking at me. So that was one of the things I had to grow from. So to every youth leader, like, listen, like you're going to make mistakes. And here's the thing. You're going to feel like you have, because you have souls on the line. But realize that if your heart is connected to the will of God and the vision of the house, you may make mistakes, but you learn from them and you get better.
Yeah, so. Yeah, and hopefully there's grace.
Yeah,
grace
hopefully.
Abounds within
if grace don't live there, you don't need to either.
Don't live there.
I can only live where grace lives.
Man, that's cool. So one thing that I've learned along the way is, and I don't know I can't say at what point I realized this, but for everything, there really is a season. And I think that sometimes we are in some seasons that are really, really good, and we're not able to really recognize how good a season might be until we're not in that season anymore. Some seasons can be challenging too.
Yeah.
Right. But I know that I've been a part of, 5 churches, maybe, maybe 5. And I look back and I'm like, I've had some really good runs at some churches, worked with some people who are just so dope, have done some amazing ministry. This right here, what we're doing is a pretty dope thing. Yeah. Right. And I look back and I'm like, man, I don't know if I recognized the beauty that was in each season that I was a part of until it was too late, until it was over. And I wish I would have done more of enjoying it and not thinking, oh, this is never going to end.
Yeah.
Yep. Because things end. Like, this episode could be our last episode. Or we could ride together for another 6 years.
We gonna ride.
We don't know.
We gonna ride.
Lord willing, and the creek don't ride.
We gonna ride.
But the reality is we don't know, right? And I think that I wish I would have just taken the time to really just enjoy those moments a lot more and just appreciated it. And also when it comes to the seasons piece, there's been some, I remember early on when I first started out in ministry, I was young, early 20s. One of my babies, Jessica, hey Jess, she's right here in the studio with us. She was one of my babies, right? During this time of my life, I was, not married, had no children. They got the best me because I had I ain't had nobody to go home to. Yeah. My now husband, then boyfriend, he was living up in New Jersey, right? And I was in South Florida. So it was like, hey, yeah, we can hang out at the church. I mean, I could take you home, riding all over Miami, doing all this, and the way that I was able to engage God in those years, it looked really, really different than the way that I had to engage God when I got married. Yep. And then when I started having children. And for me, it was challenging trying to adjust. What does my with God time look like as a wife now? What does it look like as a mother now? And trying to get into a new rhythm and a new routine and not realizing, hey, the way that you engage God then in your early 20s was meant for that season. Yeah. And now that you are in a new season of life, the way that you engage God, the time that you spend with God, it's got to look different. You can't wake up at 5 o'clock and 6 o'clock in the morning and pray because you got children that's looking for you. Yeah. You got things you got to do around the house. Yeah. So it looks different now. And it took me a minute to adjust to that. So I think just recognizing the seasons that you're in and enjoying them and recognizing, hey, when it's time to make some shifts.
You said something very heavy there that I think every leader needs to lean into. Taking advantage of and realizing the season, that everything has a season, and enjoying it. Because there will come a time where you're no longer the big brother, big sister. They'll look at you like either mom or dad. One of the transitions having to make is where I go visit schools. And is that your brother? And eventually move to, is that your dad?
That's because you got that gray beard.
And it came quick. You know what I mean? It used to be black. It used to be until around 28, 29. And so I said half of it belongs to ministry, other half to my kids. But it's the truth in what you said. It's how you show up in those different seasons. And I think that if leaders could really understand that there are seasons, you will have to show up differently. But the people you serve in each season are watching you. But check this out. There are some kids you served in your 20s that although they went on and grew up, they still looked at the wife you became, the mother you became. And although you stopped pouring into them on a weekly basis, they still watched their life. So much so to where they want to work with you. You know what I'm saying? One of them got the camera in our face right now. You know what I'm saying? Like so much so to where you stuck with them, right? Because
I can't get rid of this one to save my life.
You know what I mean? Because it's how you led in that season that caused them to want to watch you in different seasons. So to every leader, it's very important that you lead well in every season, because thank you, Holy Spirit. Watch this. If you fumble the season, you can drop the soul. Right? So you want to make sure you lead well in the season so they can follow you through every other season. And it may not be directly or in your face in your Bible study every week, but you have social media, ways of communicating that they follow your ministry. So that's powerful, because like in conjunction with that, for me, it's like I thought I had to please people. Like, so I made a lot of mistakes people pleasing. I mean, we would need at least 4 episodes to just like how my leadership in my early years was tailored to please people. Because working in a church environment, and some leaders listen to the podcast may understand this, that you sometimes you feel the need to make sure people like you, that people want to send their kids to what you're doing. And if you stand up for something, if you speak up for something, they won't bring their kids. And if they won't bring their kids, your pastor looks at you funny. And if your pastor looks at you funny, your job is on the line. So you find yourself pleasing people to make sure your pastor is pleased with you.
Man, listen, can I tell you how heavy that is?
Yeah.
But, you know, in ministry is one of those things where you are the earthly representation of God, right? And oftentimes we want to present the loving God and the compassionate God, right? Or the Jesus that turned the other cheek. Or we want to represent the Jesus who feeds all these people, right?
Yeah.
But we don't really recognize how we have a responsibility to hold people accountable.
Yeah.
We have a responsibility within what it is that we do within ministry to make sure that, hey, if we see something, we got to say something.
Absolutely.
You know, and I think that there's a delicate balance that we have to hold there, shepherding people, where we can't necessarily I can't tell you how many times that I've in my years now, like you say this thing of, what, in your 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s, you're thinking these different ways. Right now, like I'm like, listen, I understand what's at stake.
Yeah.
And if I don't say something to somebody, I understand the things that I am permitting. Because one of the things that I have learned is that everything is going to cost you something.
Come on.
And it's about whether or not you're willing to pay the price.
Come on.
And sometimes we allow people to pay the price for things that they shouldn't be paying for. And if we would just utilize our voices and our prophetic gifts that God has given us, and to speak out about different things, or to lovingly hold somebody accountable, how we might be interjecting or getting in the way or even interceding from somebody being able to make a mistake or fumble something that they had no business fumbling, that God did not want them to fumble.
Yeah.
But because God put us in that position, we are there to be that voice and to hold them accountable, to be that earthly representation of God, the one who holds people accountable and turns tables and be like, what are y'all doing in this place?
Absolutely.
And also the one that says, hey, you hungry? Let me feed you.
Absolutely.
Let me wash your feet. Let me love you. I know you're going to betray me, because you still sit at this table and have a meal with me.
Yeah.
You know, and just to be the representation of the totality of who God is, or who, through the person of Jesus even.
Absolutely. And if you find yourself in a church and you lovingly, gracefully turn over tables and it's not received that way, shake the dust off your feet, believe in God for what your next step is.
That's right.
Now, if you turn it over tables with no grace, no love, no discernment, whatever you get from that's on you. But if you seek God and he leads you to turn some tables over, to make some decisions, to see something and say something, and you get penalized for it, know that God got you.
That's right.
Because
that's right.
I'm telling you from experience.
That's right.
And I'll be very candid. I lost some kids because I didn't turn some tables over. And sometimes I think about it, I get emotional because I see some of those kids as grown people today.
Let's have this conversation.
You know what I'm saying?
Let's have this.
I'm like, dang, I lost you trying to please people. I should have called you out when you were struggling with that. I should have called you out when you were struggling with low self-esteem, when you were struggling with your sexuality, when you were asking questions. But I was trying to please people. I didn't want to ruffle no feathers. And so I didn't say anything.
That you put out there, and I ain't saying nothing about it because I was afraid to step on your toes.
Come on. Saw it. And sometimes I got to give it to the Lord.
Yeah.
So I feel like some kids I lost.
That's
because
true.
I was trying to please people.
Yeah, I listen. There's one of my former students that I think about. It immediately comes to mind. I'm not going to dive into the details of the situation because it's not my story to tell.
Yeah,
but very similar. One of those. I saw little glimpses of different things, and when they were in high school, and I didn't say anything. And I saw different glimpses of things as they started, about to graduate, and I had a great relationship with their family, but I didn't say anything.
Yeah.
And I should have, but the reality is, so even though I didn't say anything, I still believe that, God has definitely, reclaimed that situation and has definitely, brought that situation back to life and revived and reconciled some relationships. But it took some years.
Yeah.
And some unnecessary trauma, some unnecessary situations when if I were in a better position or more mature, then I could have handled it much differently.
Yeah, it's I think of a kid, he's gone to glory, and like this young man struggled, and in my immaturity and in my young pastorate, I didn't know how to come at him the right way, but I know I should have said something.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to make my higher ups feel a certain way. So I didn't say too much, backed off of it. And I knew that in some ways I hurt him because I didn't step up. And he was battling some things and was struck by a car and killed a couple of years ago. And I never had the opportunity to have that conversation. And I had to talk to my therapist.
Yeah.
I had to talk to God because I'm like, okay, maybe if I wouldn't have been so caught up in people pleasing or pushing Purvey's agenda, I would have caught it and had the conversation that could have turned his life a different way. But I let it go. And is he in that situation now because I didn't do what I did then? And that was a rough moment. Sometimes I wonder if I would have gone against the grain and had a conversation, if he wouldn't, maybe he turned out differently. Maybe the situation turned out differently. And I had to get out to God because that was hard. I think, Candice, if I can count correctly, I've lost about 12 kids over the last 18 years. And I thank God for all of their lives, but that's the one that hurts me the most because that's the one I feel like I missed. There are some that are alive. We've had conversations, we've reconciled, and there's some that won't talk to me. Because and I say that because when you're young and ambitious and you're trying to get the numbers, you're trying to have the events, you're trying to make your pastor happy, you miss out on a lot of what these kids who are fighting things as teenagers, they don't need you to be the fun guy.
Yeah. You know what?
They don't need you to be that.
So one thing that reminds me of is I was serving in Miami when Trayvon Martin was murdered. And it wasn't until probably about...
Wait, didn't he? He killed in Florida, right?
He went to school with some of the students who were in my part of the ministry that I led. And he was killed up in near Orlando, though. But he's from down in Miami Gardens. And I look back at those moments, and I'm like, I totally didn't lean in the way that I should have. Because I'm thinking about the unrest that was happening in our nation and even the unrest that was happening within the city at the time. And I look back and I'm like, man, I had teenagers in school with this boy. And this became a national thing. And we talked about it in church, and we had had our services where the pastor, we all wore hoodies, throughout the whole service. But I'm like, we needed more. And we might have had a conversation in Bible study or something like that, but we needed more.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I was really equipped at the time to recognize that.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's one of those things where I feel like I did the best with the tools and the skills and the knowledge that I had.
Mm-hmm.
But if it was this Candice leading, it would look completely different.
Yeah.
It would look completely different the way that I would have navigated that today versus how I navigated that in my mid-20s.
Is that okay? Like, Candice, maybe God puts us in these positions. Maybe when we started, because we've had private conversations between each other and other leaders, and oftentimes we talk about the lack of mentorship that we had, because when we were coming up in youth ministry, the pastors older than us had never done youth ministry. They had always been senior pastors, senior leaders. Maybe God allowed us to have those fails so we can make sure young leaders don't. Maybe that's why we're on this podcast having this conversation.
Yep.
Because there's some young leader listening, and maybe you're trying to be what we're talking about. And maybe God sent us through all of that to get us to this point, for us to meet 7-8 years ago and to come to this point, to have this conversation so some young leaders can hear that, hey.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
I totally agree with that, because I do believe that, all things work together for the good, right? Of those who I do believe that, I think that that's so real. And I think that it's through those situations that equips us to be able to navigate every conversation that we have today here.
Yeah.
And also a huge part of why we're doing BOON is so that other people don't have to make some of the same mistakes that we've made.
Yep.
So that other people can be wiser earlier.
Yeah.
And
wiser, say that.
Wiser earlier. And
one more time for the Holy Ghost. One more time.
So that some people can be
Say
wiser. No, seriously, some people can be wiser earlier, because I look at it like this, right? If I had the opportunity, and I had some pretty good people. One guy, in particular, I think of Bashan Jackson. He's a pastor in Fayetteville, Georgia. Mm-hmm. And he was one who was launching a church, and he's like, Candice, I want you to be my youth pastor. I'm like, man, I don't know how to do that. And then he was like, nah, but I'll teach you. And I was like, okay, great. And he really did coach me through, right? He taught me what to do. And I was blessed to be able to sit under him for a couple of years while I was in seminary, because he taught me a lot. And Bashan, I'll forever be grateful, and I think about the role that he played. But yet when I moved to South Florida, I kind of just like drifted apart a little bit. And every now and then he'll hit me up. When I first launched BOON, he's like, man, why you ain't tell me that? Why you ain't tell me that? And I feel like I had some people who were rooting for me. But my goal with doing this is to be able to provide other people with a community. So we're not out there on our own. So we're not out there trying to figure out, hey, we had a major thing happen in our city. We don't know what to do. Yeah. You got a whole community of people you can tap into to figure it out. Somebody probably has gone through it, like, hey, I need some money for something in my ministry. You got a whole community you can tap into to help you figure out how to navigate it. Absolutely. I got a kid who's gone AWOL. You got a whole community you can tap into to try to figure it out, so that we can be wiser earlier and not make some of the mistakes. Because you think about the trajectory that our world is going in, and so many people are talking about this next generation and the youth and the roads that they're taking, and how they're such a lost generation, and how they're this and how they're that. Like, there's too much at stake. Yeah. There's too much at stake. I mean, it's souls, but also on earth as it is in heaven, right? If we want people to experience glory and experience abundance and experience God and experience beauty on earth, then there's things that we can do within our power and within our capabilities to equip some families and some children and some youth to experience it now, and not have to wait till you get on the other side of glory in order to experience some abundance. It don't have to go there.
Absolutely.
It doesn't have to be like that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like, we've got a whole community that we're building, that we've got. And let's use it.
That's why we were born out of necessity, right? Like there's a need.
Yeah.
There's a need. And I used to fault our older leaders. I feel like they left us behind. I feel like they left us to fend for ourselves. As I got older, I realized a lot of them didn't know how. So what happened was we formed a community.
Yeah.
Those of us that kind of started this youth ministry rise in Black church, because it's only been around the last 20 years. The Black church has only really embraced youth pastors as a whole over the last 20 years.
Come on now, because what was it before that? It was church school.
Yep.
Right? It was like AME church had a little YPD. Not a little YPD. Take out a little, y'all.
You know, like that. You know,
had their had their YPD. Right? I mean, other churches had different little things that they were doing within their churches, and everything wasn't necessarily, hey, what do we? It was no strategic ministry.
It was event driven.
It was event driven.
Kids are going to Six Flags. Kids going skating.
Mm-hmm.
Kids are doing this, and then Bible studies were just we knew the lessons, but there was no practicality. Because we had different games to help learn the Bible verses, to learn the Bible, the books of the Bible, but there was no practicality. And I will forever be grateful for the churches I grew up in, but they did not teach us how to make the word practical in our lives. So we grew up being a part of the church, but not being at one with Christ. So we grew up being church goers, but not Christ followers. Right? Because we were taught how to go to church. Because you know how it is. As you became a teenager, your parents told you can go out with your friends on Saturday,
but you going to church on Sunday.
Right? So there was no structure around the reason why you don't act this way when you go out. Not just because you're representing your family and not embarrass your mama. No, because you are a child of God.
That's right.
And there's a way children of God act. Right? And so what does that mean practically? We weren't taught that. So we were ushers or ushers, right?
You knew when to let people in and out.
Absolutely.
You knew if you would walk through the church, you had to put your finger up.
Absolutely. We knew all of it.
You knew the Decalogue. You knew
Come on.
the Apostles' Creed.
The benedictions. You knew devotion.
You knew when to stand.
All the songs and everything. You knew it all. But didn't know how to live it out.
That's right.
So we had to learn from each other.
Yeah.
So now, Candice, we the OGs now.
Listen,
embrace it.
And isn't that wild?
You gotta grab
though?
it. We're the OGs now.
You got more great than me. But isn't that wild though? Think about it though. Like, isn't that wild to me?
Yeah.
Like at this point, we in my life, you're I can't call myself an OG, but you an OG.
Say Jesus was 30 years old and had all them teenagers following behind him. So Jesus was an OG at 30. So you an OG. I ain't gonna say your age, but you're an OG at your age.
That's so funny. So what else you got? What other lessons?
Man, I learned how to take my time.
Okay.
I learned to take my time. And when I say that, stop rushing the lessons I taught. I would take verses and take one verse for a month and teach the mess out the verse. The geographical context, the historical context, what is it saying, the exegesis of it, the eisegesis of it, like the whole thing. Because what I realized was these babies were in school in AP classes, taking AP courses.
Come on now,
right? And so they were at school being challenged academically.
That's right. But in church, you getting
spoon fed.
That's right.
And so one of the things I had to learn was stop giving baby food and start feeding meals.
Yes, sir.
Because they were learning at school. You gonna learn at church. But I had to go get full course meals myself.
That's right.
See what I'm saying? You can't feed what you don't have.
That's right. I'm so glad you brought that up because I feel like I don't know how many people in youth ministry or kids ministry are actually being students of the word, right? Or taking their personal discipleship, their personal study as seriously as they need to. Because I look at it like this. If I am, give you an example. When I first graduated from seminary and I went down to South Florida to serve at a church down there, I was so nervous to teach my first Bible study. Because I was thinking that the conversation and the things that the teenagers were going to be asking me was similar to the conversations that I was having in my seminary classroom. And when I realized, hey, these conversations aren't the same, then it's easy for you to lower your standard and stop becoming a student because you realize, hey, I'm already several steps ahead of you. So I don't need to keep on sharpening the tools that are within my toolbox. I can keep on just riding on the knowledge that I gained 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And to keep on floating because I'm still ahead of you and what it is that I know. But the reality is that the things that our teenagers and even children are exposed to within this world, they're not being exposed to baby food. They're being exposed to real life situations. And since they're being exposed to real life situations, we need to equip them with real life tools to be able to navigate through some of these things. So, I know for me personally, that's why I kind of said the earlier thing about the different seasons of life and the ways that you engage God in different seasons. Like there's a way that you engage God personally for yourself, just for your personal fuel. And then there's a ways that you engage God for things that you need to share with other people. And sometimes we get so caught up in only spending time with God when we've got to preach a sermon. And then we're giving people, the congregation, the word that was meant for ourselves, because don't have those two times separated our with God time separated. So like, hey, that was a word for you. That wasn't necessarily a word for the congregation, but because you don't spend time with God for yourself and spend time with God learning for hearing from other people, that you're giving other people things that were meant for yourself. And if we really are going to be doing our due diligence to equip the younger generations with solid food, equip them with things that they can really build upon, holding them accountable, then we've got to be equipping them with some real things and not just going on skates.
I mean, it could be less events, more discipleship. But
I agree with you, Purvey. But the reality is, like, what these churches want events.
That's crazy.
They want to see the pictures. They want to see the things that their kids are doing. They want to see the kids getting together,
see them being discipled. Take pictures of them.
They can be discipled at Six Flags when they're praying in front of Superman, huh?
Right? That's discipleship. My goodness. But like, we have to do better. And I'm not saying I'm giving up hope on leaders that are 50, 60 plus. I'm talking about the senior pastors that are between 35 and 50, because you probably have either grown up in a church or you were a youth pastor. If you're between the age of 35 and 50, you grew up in a church that had a youth pastor. More than likely,
even because Geraldine.
Over the last 20 to 25 years, the Black church has embraced the youth pastor role. You and I have been doing it 20. So we've been doing it 20. The pastor that's 50 was 30. You see what I'm saying? So what I'm saying is, like, Pastor, I need you to understand, you have to don't push events so much on your youth pastor that it makes them get so swamped with putting on good events that they aren't discipled.
Right, because you can spend so much time planning an event, but not spending time with God for yourself, for your message. And the message becomes an afterthought. The Sunday becomes an afterthought. Your time with your kids become an afterthought because you got this big event. And we know that events going to drive in the numbers in a way that sometimes your weekly services are just not.
Oh, by the way, we want kids to pray with other kids while they walk around the carnival. But we forgot. The kids don't know how to pray. Dang it. Missed that part. We were so busy planning the event, we forgot to teach the kids how to pray. We got to do better.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, slowing down, taking your time. That's a good one. That's a goal one, and recognize. Yes.
And that's a failure we talk about, but I know there's some leaders watching, and we're not talking about you. We're reflecting on things that we've done. And if you're doing that, that's why BOON exists. Holla at us. Reach out to us. We have the capability of either connecting to you or pouring into you personally, so you don't make some of the same mistakes, because the young people you're serving, they're different from our young people. Here's how. A lot of young people we served had a little bit of church influence. This generation, you're getting kids who have parents who are unchurched. They're unchurched, and they're coming with a whole lot of questions. And the questions they come with, you cannot afford to say no. You can afford to say I don't know. You cannot afford not to come back with an answer.
That's right.
Because sometimes you won't know. So you can afford to say you don't know, but you cannot afford to not come back with an answer.
Yeah. All right, I got one last one. This one, bro, I feel like was one that was hard for me to learn. And it was hard for me to learn because it has something to do with identity, right? And I had to recognize that my calling was my calling. And my calling and my identity is not wrapped up or tied into anybody else's.
Wow.
Now, there might be moments when our callings align and we're walking together for a certain season, but the things that God has me to do are the things that God would have me to do. And it's easy to sit under leadership who you admire and you get your calling misunderstood. And you start hearing God in ways that aligns more with the person that you admire and not necessarily with what it is that God is uniquely telling you to do. And that can cause you to stay in places too long. When it's time, hey, God says the season is over, and you end up staying there a little bit longer because you're like, hey, no, we called together.
Yeah.
No, you're not.
Yeah.
You know, I've seen some people in ministry who have, you know, and there's nothing wrong with loving your pastor, loving your mentors. There ain't nothing wrong with that. Ain't nothing wrong with honoring them. Ain't nothing wrong with that, right? I think for me, the challenge comes in when you're unable to walk fully in what it is that God would have you to do because you're so busy trying to make sure that you're pleasing somebody else in a way that you carry out your calling. So that was one for me that was just a challenging piece to learn, is that my calling is my calling, and it should not be wrapped up in anyone else's.
It can't be.
It can't be. For you to walk fully in it, it cannot be.
It cannot be.
And you'll be stunted in your ability to maximize the way that God can use you if you're not walking fully or understanding, you know, hey, this is where I'm supposed to be. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. And the freedom that you have the potential to get when you walk more confidently or more boldly in what you're called to do, it's gold.
Yeah, it's something you as a leader have to recognize that that there will be a moment where Paul and Barnabas disagree.
Yeah. Yep.
There were, and it's okay. It's okay.
Yep.
And I, especially to our Black churches, you see it. I'm not saying we should not honor, but sometimes you see it so much to where you honor to a fault.
That's right.
And you never become who God has called you to be. You only become a copy of who you're honoring. That's
right. Yep.
And that is a fail we don't want leaders to make. Right? Because there's so much God is calling you to do. And check this out. I'm going to go left, come back right. God may not be calling you to start a church. Not saying God is calling you to pastor, but God is calling you. God may not be calling you to pastor, but God may be calling you to no longer follow your pastor. And that's okay. God may not be calling you to pastor, but God may be calling you to no longer follow your pastor. And not following him does not mean you don't honor or love him or her. It just means that God is calling you to. I've seen, there's a youth pastor I know who left the church to go into education because he felt being a youth pastor was boxing him in, and he can do more for students being a counselor on a campus. So went back to school, got his degree, and is now back in the school system. A place where people are running from, he ran to because that's where God was calling him to. It's that type of independence and that type of discernment where no, God is calling me to this, and I cherish the time we had and what God allowed us to do. But there's something else God is calling me for. He called me to.
Yeah, and we only discern that if we are, like you were saying earlier, if we slow down and we take our time to really allow ourselves to be filled up. And I think, and it's in those prayer moments when we are truly equipped. You know, my spiritual director says this. She says that prayer is, I'm gonna get it all wrong, but essentially what she's saying is like prayer is the struggle, right? Is you battle with God in those moments of prayer because prayer is what equips you in order to walk into everything else. Prayer is when you battle with God in order to gain the confidence and the reassurance that this is what you're supposed to be doing, right? That's where your ability comes in. That's where your reconciling comes in. That's when you pull it all together. And if we spend our time with God, not just in prayer, but in studying, then we'll be more confident in being able to hear the voice of God, discern the voice of God, recognize the voice of God, and be able to be more comfortable and more confident walking in that voice of God that God is whispering to you about what it is that you're supposed to be doing. Right. So all of this stuff, it's just so intertwined with each other. So for all of you all listening here, this conversation, we ain't trying to beat up on y'all. This is, like Purvey said, this is what we messed up, and hopefully y'all are able to use some of the things that we have messed up with in order to be better equipped as you continue to do the work of ministry, because like always, ministry ain't for the faint at heart.
Come on.
It ain't easy, man. It is not easy. It's one of those things where, people might get into it and be like, oh, for the glitz and the glam, and I want this and I want that. And I think our nation and in our world is so caught up in image, public image, social image, that we don't necessarily always do the work to make sure that our private life aligns with our public persona. And we look at somebody who might have 1,500 followers on Instagram and automatically write them off as being unworthy, as if their worth is in their number of followers that they have, right? And I think that as we continue doing this, in order to realign ourselves, we have got to be reminded of our mission, reminded of our calling. And some of those things only really happen when you take the time to really sit at the feet of Jesus and spend that one-on-one time with God, getting that Genesis 2:25, naked and unashamed before the Lord, and saying, here I am, God, right? That's not from Genesis. The other part is from Genesis. Mixed up two different verses, y'all. Naked and unashamed from Genesis. Here I am, Lord, send me, is something else, right? But y'all follow what I'm saying.
It's for every leader to know that your failures aren't final.
That's right.
Your failures are final. Candice talked earlier in the episode about seasons. And some leader listening to this episode, you may be in the beginning season of your ministry. Some leader you may feel like you're in the middle. And some leaders may feel like you're at the end. But whatever season you're in, be present in that season. Be willing to be poured into in that season. And realize that season may come with failures, but those failures aren't final. They're for you to learn from, so you can sit in not necessarily this seat, but a seat, and speak to a leader that's coming behind you and say, hey, don't do this. That's what it is. And so you're not listening to people who have it right or who always got it right, but you're listening to two people with kindred spirits who love God, love the calling that God has on each other, and have grown to love each other as brother and sister, and say, yo, we have stories to tell, wisdom to give, and we're going to use this platform to help leaders in whatever way we can, because we believe in them, we believe in the church, and we believe that leaders have what it takes.
Yeah, and we believe in what y'all are doing.
Yeah.
Yep. So, yeah, man, this has been good. Yeah. I think you just wrapped, but any last words?
I love talking to you, man. You all right? We've had some great guests.
We have.
You guys are great guests, and I love talking to them.
We do good talking.
I want every guest. Hey, we love y'all. We love you. And if we call you to come on the show, please come on. But it's just something, it's good. It's good. I think, Ashley producing the show, Ashley behind the scene, she like moves her head like an old church mother. and you know what I'm saying? And so what happens is, I'm churchy. So when I see people move like they in church, it stirs me up. So in that episode, Candice got stirred up. I got stirred up. So hopefully y'all got stirred up at home too.
Was back there like this.
Yeah. I was on that head moving back and forth. But no, I enjoyed it.
Man, y'all, thank you for tuning into this episode of the BOON podcast. Keep the conversation going on the BOON Community Facebook group. Head over to our Facebook and find it there. If you can't find it on Facebook, head over to our website, thebooncommunity.com, and you can find it there. Until next time, peace. A special shout out to our team for making this episode happen. This podcast was produced by Ashley Johnson. Theme song composed by GR the Great. Special thanks to our Fresh Leftovers family.
Legacy and DJ for production. Production assistant, Jessica Virgil. Edited by Jay. Co-host, Robert E. Purvey. Hosted and directed by me, Candice Wynn. And a heartfelt thanks to you, our listeners, for your continued support.